Thank you very much. So yesterday and today, for the most part, we have spent our time focusing on Russia's atrocities in Ukraine and in Syria. But now this panel will specifically focus on the geopolitical insecurity Russia causes outside these regions and why the world should care, about what Russia is doing, and also how Russia props up the autocrats and is in partnership with a lot of them across the globe in order to commit atrocities and to basically upend world order. So I will start with Natalie. We saw Ukraine as a testing ground. Russia, basically has this hybrid warfare playbook or asymmetric warfare. Ukraine was the testing ground for it, as long as a lot of Russia's other unfortunate neighbors. And then we saw it begin to spread across Europe and into the United States, into Africa, across the Middle East. Can you discuss the impact it has and the tactics and methods that Russia uses in Germany and in pretty much across Europe?
Thank you very much. That's a wide field, and if you have 2 days, I can explain to you all this in detail. Now, I hate to disagree with Olga, because we almost agree on everything, which makes usually very boring conversations. This time I would disagree, and I think Natia would agree with me, to say that the testing ground was actually Georgia in 2008. The playbook is the same, except that this time we are seeing Russia waging a war not only territorially, but also in cyberspace. And it is more flagrant, of course, since 2014. It started in 2008. I think Natia would agree with that. Yes, how do I answer your question briefly? And I have very, very few minutes. I was asked recently to deliver a lecture on the alleged superiority of the Russian Federation, or their successes, or their results in the field of hybrid warfare. Do they deliver? What are their tactics? What are their strategies? And it was my last lecture on behalf of my previous employer. And I decided to leave the diplomatic field and to straight talk the audience, which had quite a reaction, because I had, of course, professional listeners. And I told them there is no such thing as a superiority of the Russian Federation in the field of hybrid warfare. There is only provocative weakness from our side. And I titled the lecture, "We Got Everything Wrong for Far Too Long." And indeed, we'd been warned. We'd been warned by our Estonian allies after the Bronze Soldier crisis in 2007. I remember at that time Estonian officials literally yelling their lungs out, telling us, old Europe, wake up. The new battlefield is not going to be only a battlefield, there will be also a cyber dimension. And oh, by the way, we are already at war. And what was our reaction? More engagement, more Russlandversteher from the German side, more negotiation, more sweet talking, more summits where we would try to find how we could build synergies with what was already a power threatening Europe, and not only Europe. Then came the summit of Bucharest, which is widely known as the betrayal of Bucharest, where Central Europeans and our northern Eastern Europeans allies, the Balts, warned us about an ongoing influence operation trying to deter the alliance from granting map to both Georgia and Ukraine. And still, France and Germany chose to disregard this warning and preferred keeping those two countries out, with the results that a couple of months later, Georgia was attacked. And as if it had not been enough of a warning, 2014, we had a renewal of this scenario. But between 2008 and 2014, we sleepwalked, engaging them, making deals, putting for the German, for Germany, or in Germany's case, economic interests before security interests, jeopardizing the security of our neighbors. I won't go into the Nord Stream disaster, but there is not only the Nord Stream disaster. And the disaster of what the German-Russia policy is did not only start under Angela Merkel, it started, of course, under Schröder, and some people say even earlier. What have we learned in 2014? We had a revisionist power waging an information war in Germany, and we had prominent academics and prominent journalists claiming, what? Crimea was always Russian. It was bland revisionism. And this operation was prepared. This elite capture allowed Russian disinformation to prevail in the debate. And you had talk shows where the Ukraine would be discussed without Ukrainians attending. Absolutely stunning thing happened. Now, we've come a long way, and probably 2022 was a wake-up call. But I'm telling you, at what cost? And how long did it take us to wake up? And how many people who were then in power have actually blood on their hands because they did not take a stand on time? So what do the Russians do? Well, they exploit our weaknesses. They are able to apply strategic corruption on our elites because people are corrupt. And nobody found, when Schröder went to work for Gazprom, anything to say about it. It took years until people started really to speak up in Germany, but it was much too late. So what is our provocative weakness? Well, our provocative weakness is that we are slow to respond. We did not listen to our junior allies when they warned us and they knew what was going on, because we did not listen because we felt oh so superior. We are Germany. Oh, so important, we know everything better. We have much better relations to the Kremlin. We should know. We knew so well, and we were so well informed that 24 hours before the attack on Ukraine in February 2022, the head of our foreign intelligence was still on Ukrainian soil because he had been briefed those were maneuvers and the Russians would not attack. This is how close our relations were to the Kremlin, and so well informed we were about the strategic picture. So to make a long story short, is there a superiority of the Russian Federation in the field of hybrid warfare? I'll tell you what, no. From my experience, the moment we man up and the moment we strike back, they pull out. The Balts have proven it in the field of disinformation, in the field of media literacy, cyber literacy, resilience. All this is possible. But it requires something that many countries were not ready to have from the beginning, and it is a political will.
Thank you. Very powerful and very truthful. And I will redeem myself right now because I was going back to 2003-4 in Ukraine with the election interference. Okay. Nadia? Hi, Nadia. Okay, so after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the West took, a breather, said we won the Cold War. But we know that Russia was thinking otherwise. They were seeking revenge. They were seeking justice because they felt that we were the ones who collapsed the Soviet Union, which obviously is not the truth. And from there, we saw 2 wars in Chechnya. The images we saw in Syria literally came out of the Grozny playbook. From there, we saw in 2007 an attack on Estonia, the first very organized, well-orchestrated cyber and information attack, shutting down and paralyzing the Estonian government and finance and whatnot. 2008, we see the invasion of Georgia. The world looked the other way. And then from there, we continue seeing this pattern of where we are from eventually the illegal annexation of Crimea, occupation of Donbass, activities across Africa, atrocities across Africa, what happened in Syria, election interference across Europe, polarizing countries and polarizing alliances. Can you discuss what Russia is doing in Georgia and, what you saw from that point of view?
Of course. Thank you, Olga, for this question. And I have to say, I pretty much agree with all points that Natalie just mentioned. And I think that Georgia has really served as a testing ground for Russia's malign activities and hybrid warfare. And in fact, in 2008, it was the first case when Russia integrated its cyber component into its military operation. So since then, of course, Georgia went through a lot of phases internally and externally, but cyber threats remain very much present to this day, alongside other threats that we've been seeing evolving throughout decades coming from Russia. And I think what you just described is a very clear demonstration of continuity within Russian foreign policy. And that's why if Russia is not stopped today and now in Ukraine, we will be seeing more of these cases in terms of continuity of this aggressive foreign policy, because we see that the negotiations, any attempts to somehow normalize relations with Russia or somehow to deal with Putin's regime diplomatically have failed before, and I have no doubts at all that any attempts to broker any sort of peace deal, whatever that means, or any sort of diplomatic solution is just a wishful thinking, and it will end up in a greater tragedy. And unfortunately, this is the reality that we are facing now, and this is the consequence of a very weak Western foreign policy towards this region and towards the countries, especially Ukraine and Georgia, that have been directly targeted by Russia throughout many decades, simply because these countries did not see their identity, their future, to be as part of Russia's as part of Russia's imperial plans. And in that sense, of course, the European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations have played a huge role, and the will of Ukrainian and Georgian people to be part of the Western civilized Western world, I would say, has played a huge role. What we've been seeing in Georgia, it hasn't started in 2008 either. This conflict has started well before, in 1990s. And unfortunately, throughout many years, we have been seeing various cases of overt aggression from the Russian side. Today, Georgia is facing some of the most pressing threats, such as borderization, for example, which entails a gradual annexation of Georgian territory by illegally expanding the so-called occupation zone. And by that, I mean that there are instances and cases when Georgian people living in their homes, in their houses, have ended up waking up on the other side of the occupation line, surrounded by the FSB forces, and being forced to accept Russian passports. And this is also one demonstration of this continuity, because we have seen how Russia has been using its passportization policy, both in case of Ukraine and in case of Georgia. In terms of narratives as well and disinformation, this whole narrative about the Georgian genocides and Ukrainian genocide and Russia being forced to protect the local population. This is what we've been seeing for many, many years. And unfortunately, until 2022, when we saw that Putin's ambitions expanded even further, it took so much time for the Western leaders to accept the reality that this is just the way the Putin's mindset is focused, is how he sees the continuation, the expansion of his foreign policy goals. And unfortunately, even now, as we are speaking, for instance, now the big topic in Georgia is that Russia is allegedly trying to establish its naval base in occupied Abkhazia. So there are further attempts to annex Georgian territories, to formalize the annexation, because as we know, in 2008, Putin decided to recognize Abkhazia and the so-called South Ossetia Valley region as independent. But there have been continuous attempts to integrate these regions into Russian, in terms of, for instance, integrate the forces, separatist forces, into the Russian military structures, for instance. And also now we see that Russia is trying to build the naval. To build the naval, to expand the naval capabilities and build a permanent naval base in Russian-occupied Abkhazia. So that's why I think it is so important to stress on the fact that what we see in Ukraine and the fearless fight of Ukrainian people, this is our fight. And Ukraine today is fighting for our future, for the future of entire Europe. And that's why it is so important to make sure that Ukraine gets everything that they need in order to succeed with this battle.
Thank you, Natia. Omar, you worked on hybrid warfare operations and tactics. Can you discuss what hybrid warfare is? Because that term constantly gets tossed around, but many don't know exactly what it is, and how Russia uses this globally.
First, thank you so much, Olga and Irina, for inviting me. I am very happy and honored to be here. And the question also, like Natalia said, would need another conference, but very briefly, we talk about hybrid warfare in a sense that this mix of multiple domains and multiple actors, so cyber intelligence, but also air, ground, and naval, so the conventional side, with blending of actors, so regular formations with the irregular formations, the militias and other forms of armed non-state actors, and also terrorist groups if needed. So this becomes hybrid in a way that you're blending the conventional with the unconventional, the regular with the irregular, and also there's some diplomatic side to it and some political, non-violent political dimension as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But please allow me actually to support you And I agreed with everything Natalia said, but I just want to add one more bit, which it actually it also it all started these operations with 1991 with Chechnya before the first war, before 1994, and actually Ukraine was also there. Why in 1991 the Chechens did their referendum in 1990, if I remember correctly. 1991 they were de facto independent, and then the destabilization operations. So as we later on called it Russian new generation warfare. So you have the proxies, you have the subversion attempts, you have the integration of this diplomatic talk while doing the military operations, the psychological and information operation. That was all starting in 1991, but they just kept on getting better at it every now and then. And 1991 as well, if you remember correctly, the Russian Federation with its president, President Yeltsin, agreed 3 times on the territorial borders of Ukraine. 3 times, once in Belarus, once in Kazakhstan, and once in the Russian Federation. Same time, and back to the hybrid, 1991, President Yeltsin declares that if, I'm not quoting him directly, but the meaning was if Ukraine kept on going westwards, then the Crimea question and the Donbas question will be raised, meaning that there will be troubles there and possible annexation. 93, I got a video of Djuhar Dudayev, the former president of Chechnya. Actually, a Ukrainian colleague sent it to me. 1993, Djuhar Dudayev was, this is actually before the first Chechen war as well, saying that it's just a matter of time before Russia annexes Crimea again and parts of the Donbas. So he was describing what happened and he was killed in 1996 while talking actually to a Russian politician on the phone, so trying to negotiate a political settlement for the first Chechen war in April 1996, and got a Russian airstrike killed him while negotiating with Russian politicians. So also the hybrid dimension is very clear there. So that's on one side. On the other side, in terms of how they got better at it, they kept on getting better. 1996 was a disaster for the conventional side by the loss of the first Chechen war against basically a very, very weak force that had no proper air defenses, no proper armor, no proper air force, not much really that was going on, but they lost the war. 99, the second Chechen war, which was quite interesting because in 97, and back to the diplomatic side of the equation, 97, the Russian Federation under President Yeltsin signed the Treaty of Eternal Friendship between the Russian Federation and the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. Okay, 2 years later, President at that point Prime Minister Putin said that treaty is not worth toilet paper. So that's also the problem with the negotiations with the Russian Federations. Fast forward, I think Nadia excellently summarized the case with Georgia, but there you can see some significant development in terms of hybrid warfare. One, they used some of the forces that were loyal to them in Chechnya. So the militia management dimension, you turned a force that was fighting against you to a force that was loyal to you. So if you want an example from Iraq, you turned the Sahwat, the awakenings, the tribal awakenings that fought against, were collaborating with Al-Qaeda in Iraq and then were turned against them. Use that force to invade another country. Take it as a military formation within, shall we say, the U.S. armed forces, and then send it to another country to invade it. So this is what they've done, which is actually, in terms of militia management, I'm not talking now about the illegal or the ethical side. In terms of militia management, that's an improvement. Plus the militias that were, the separatist militias in Abkhazia and in South Ossetia, they also coordinated in terms of interoperability. They were doing that, and of course the hybrid operation of suddenly before the invasion, you disseminate passports on anyone in Georgia who wants to hold a Russian passport. So disseminating Russian or giving Russian passport is not really an act of war. But in terms of hybrid operations, yeah, that's an act of war. You're basically creating loyalists within the country that you want to invade to fight with you. And to actually claim the legitimacy of fighting because you're protecting them. You're entering to protect them. So in Georgia, it got better. The Georgians did very well, by the way. People forget. Georgia, in 5 days, brought down 22 between fighters and actually one Tupolev 22, so one strategic bomber, down in 5 days. So that's a good performance for the Georgian air defenses. And they injured the head of the operation near Skhin Valley. So the head of the campaign was injured there. So the Georgians, given the situation, did well. And then fast forward to 2014, to Crimea. Should I talk about Crimea or do I have because I don't want to take too much time. Yeah? So Crimea was so Georgia was not a very good operation. So like it conveyed, despite the success, relative success, it conveyed a lot of weaknesses, both on the hybrid dimension and the conventional dimensions of the Russian armed forces. But if you want like the top operation, that was Crimea. You take the most important geostrategic region in Ukraine with the loss of one militiaman, they didn't lose anyone in the Russian armed forces, the regulars. They lost one as the self-defense force member, you know, and you get away with it. Like we remember the sanctions, the serious sanctions, light sanctions happened after Crimea, but the serious sanctions happened after the Malaysian Airlines downing, you know. So it happened because you killed your proxies, or actually your regulars, have killed European women and children, you know, by toppling a civilian airline, or downing a civilian airline. So Crimea was in a sense the top of the hybrid game. Why? The infiltration happened to very senior ranks. The psychological operations were very good. The civilian fronts that were created, civil fronts, like you claim it's a civilian organization, but it's really not. It's an intelligence front or a group of militias. Were done to a very high degree. A series of kidnapping and assassinations happened as well, and you know, there was no accountability for that. And after you destabilize the situation that far, in the middle of course, a revolution that was happening in Kyiv, you attained already victory. You shaped the environment to attain victory. You did your Maskirovka tactics quite well. And then you secure all this by sending your conventional force. So you send the forces, or you move your air assault operations and the amphibious operations, one of the largest in East European history, by the way, since 1945. Did not show up on the radar of many politicians. On the intelligence it did, and I'll explain that in a sense. But you just secure the victory, not bring it about by your conventional forces. So that was the top of the game. Three things here, just to mention how they destabilized, as Natalia mentioned, or how they delayed the decision making. As far as I know, most of the Western intelligence agencies knew exactly what was going on and were reporting that. And were saying this is the Russian operation, it will end up in taking over Crimea. And then, so the intelligence got the assessment right. They uploaded to the politicians. Now the politicians need to make a quick decision. Why? Because then they will order the military. The military needs to prepare and then to mount. And this is where Russia has room to maneuver at the political level. So you had someone like Mr. Schroeder, who was trying to convince the Merkel administration that this is not really a Russian operation. They're there to just, you know, it's a humanitarian intervention to protect the Russian-speaking population. Not that the Russian-speaking population required that in Crimea. So you play on the political level just to delay the decision for the military to act. And it's like if you think of it, it's a bank robbery. You know, you enter the bank and you have like a specific time before the police comes. So that was the top of the game again, because they delayed for months, if not years. We have to remember the Obama administration, the Merkel chancellorship, and other and actually, I'm not a fan of the Cameron government. They caused the Brexit and that disunity that happened in Europe they were part of it, but they were among the few that were not very happy with that. But the aforementioned governments pressured the Ukrainians not to fight in Crimea. The counteroffensive that came in the summer of 2014 was Plan B. Plan B just to push them back. And then it succeeded in liberating Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, Mariupol, and other places. So fast forward again to Syria. Syria was also a successful one. So you had two successful ones, Crimea and Syria. 2015. Why? Because they were able to enhance their air operations to a level that their dumb bombs were very accurate on static targets. On moving targets, it was not as successful. Their again, militia management was very high. They realized quickly that the infantry forces of Assad regime, so the regular forces, are not very effective. So they decided to work with groups like Hezbollah, like some of the Afghan and the Fatimiyun militia was there, and their commander was actually they basically were successful in making him switch loyalties from the Iranians to them, because he was very combat effective. So, or his group was very combat effective, brigade-sized formation, and they were able to more or less enhance their militia management, and then enters the Wagner group, which is a long story, so I'm not going to enter in it. So Syria was an actual successful operations because they kept the regime, and then they had their own bases. They brought back territory from the regime. And they enhance in a way their interoperability and other capabilities. And then enters 2022. And I'll just mention one thing and I'll stop there because I had a very long answer. 2022, I think it was a larger Crimea. So the idea there was hybrid as well. Put your agents in charge in houses in Bucha and in Irpin. Try to infiltrate the government and have your FSB assessment that says that the government is going to run like Yanukovych. So Yanukovych ran to Moscow, they will run to London or Washington. The people are going to be celebrating us and seeing us as liberators, and the army is going to collapse like in Crimea. Okay, so that was the assessment. Of course, that assessment, and then get your conventional forces that are not really that prepared in terms of the logistics, supplies, just to secure the victory. So you attend the victory by hybrid and then secure it by conventional. Okay, that did not work out well. So then we have holes in the games, and we can talk about it a bit later. Thank you. Sorry for the long answers.
Thank you. That's actually definitely, you covered a lot of ground, and very much needed ground, because unfortunately, especially with Western media, they for some reason think that all of this started in 2022, which is the furthest from the case, as you described, that this was already beginning as the collapse of the Soviet Union was happening. Sanjar, so we see a lot of the military tactics that Russia uses, the cruelty, the brutality, the striking at civilians, the strategic targeting of civilians. And we see a lot of these tactics that came out of both Soviet-Afghan wars. Then we had, a few years ago, the horrific scenes of the collapse of Kabul. I mean, the chaos, the scenes of people scrambling to the airport, the assassinations happening, every minute with the government and people who were, journalists and activists being assassinated as the Taliban was coming in. And I remember watching Russian coverage that day, and I will never forget, as you see these scenes of literally chaos and fire, and I mean people hanging on to planes and trying to get onto planes at the airport, the Russians are saying, why? There's absolutely nothing happening here, and we're being guarded, our embassy is perfectly fine, and whatnot. Can you discuss the relations between the Russians and the Taliban, and prior even to last year? Because I mean, for well over a decade, they were even supplying weapons to them, and we know that working against Western policy.
Thank you. I would like to talk about the Russian hybrid warfare mainly in the context of Afghanistan, because I personally experienced the occupation of Russians in the 80s. I was a child, but still I remember what happened. The Russian hybrid warfare dates back actually to the 18th and 19th century. In which the Great Britain and Russia were... yes, seriously. Let me explain. Great Britain and Russia were competing for gaining and capturing more territories and expanding their sphere of influence. This era is also known as the Great Game between the two superpowers of the time. During the 1800s, the British Indian Empire fought 3 major wars in Afghanistan to conquer the country. In all those 3 wars, the British were defeated, and they were not able to establish their puppet regime in Afghanistan for a long period of time. In the meantime, the Russians used this opportunity and annexed some of Afghanistan territories in Central Asia and extended their border to Amur Darya, or Oxus, which is now the official border between Afghanistan and Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. The Russian warfare in Afghanistan continued until now, as they consider Afghanistan as the backyard and sphere of their influence. As you all know, Afghanistan was occupied by the Red Army during the 80s, and due to this occupation, 1 million Afghan citizens lost their lives and 3 million escaped the country. I personally and many Afghan experts believe that the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan was the main reason for the 50 years of conflict in Afghanistan and resulted in complete destruction of Afghanistan infrastructure and social fabric. Fortunately, we were able to expel Russians from Afghanistan with the help of our Western allies, killing 20,000 of Red Army troops and wounding many more. The current Russian government, as mentioned by other participants here, considers itself as the higher of the Soviet Union and the Tsarist Russia. Putin thinks that he has a mission to reestablish the lost position of Russia in the world stage by expanding the hybrid warfare, disinformation, election interference, and other cases like Ukraine and Syria full-scale military invasion. According to several sources, Moscow has turned its attention to the Taliban and is arming and providing training for them while having diplomatic relation with the Afghanistan government during the NATO and US presence in Afghanistan. We had several evidence of Russian weaponry and landmines against armored vehicles of the NATO and Russian and US army in Afghanistan. This has been indirectly confirmed by Vladimir Putin himself, who said in an interview on TV channel Mir 24 on April 12, 2017. He says, quote, "It's necessary to develop relations with all forces in Afghanistan, including the Taliban." Putin also said, "Of course, there are many radical elements, but just like our partners, including the representative of the UN, we always proceed from the fact that we need to develop cooperation with any Afghan forces based on at least 3 principles," which was, of course, the lie: acknowledgement of the Constitution of Afghanistan, disarmament, and complete national consensus. I have many examples in which the Russian government continued its hybrid warfare during the presence of the US and NATO forces in Afghanistan through supporting media outlets, establishing stations of the Sputnik News Agency in local languages of Afghanistan, and many other cases. The Russian government were the first government inviting the Taliban leaders to Moscow while they were sanctioned by the UN, and giving them the opportunity to publicize themselves via Russian platforms while the Taliban were busy killing and terrorizing my people in Afghanistan by suicide bombing, beheading, and explosions. After the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, as you mentioned, Olga, Russia still maintains its relationship with the Taliban regime, and the Russian embassy is still open in Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. With this, I would like to conclude my remark, and I'm ready to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Natalie. Over the past decade, we have seen, Russia, well, let me back up a little. Russia launched a full-scale invasion to, quote-unquote, denazify Ukraine, despite elements that Russia has many Nazi formations that have been fighting in Ukraine since 2014. Over the past decade, Russia has supported Nazi white supremacist groups across Europe and the United States, and even Putin, when he served in Dresden as a KGB officer in the 80s, he recruited and sent a Nazi into West Germany in order to start establishing the Nazi and the far-right parties. Can you tell us what effect it has had on Germany and the spread amongst all European countries?
Well, this is a tactic that has been inherited from the Soviet Union. We know that they've been conducting such operations in West Germany, mostly together with the Stasi. So infiltration operations, of course, aiming at fragmenting the political landscape in Germany and exacerbating the French parties, or creating them in this case. So what you're referring to, if people are interested to look up, is an article of Catherine Belton, who referred to this specific activity of Vladimir Putin in Dresden. I could give you the bigger picture, but in short, you will find that such operations targeting the far right spectrum with the aim of radicalization of the narratives, exacerbating social tensions, creating crises, which then get exploited by Kremlin-friendly media, and reshaped and conveyed so that they can be used by the said political parties during the election. It's a closed circle, basically. They spot a crisis, or they create a crisis, exacerbate the narratives, create a social movement, and this translates into political activism with the aim of either subversion or disruption of the political landscape. And all this is, of course, benefiting the interests of the Kremlin, specifically before elections, by the way. Now, we see this phenomenon on the far right and on the far left. And we see this not only in Germany, we see this in France, we see this in Italy. We see this in many countries that were late to the call and have failed to attain a certain resilience among, for instance, the electorate. Of course, they have a harder time doing this in Estonia, and they have a harder time doing this in Lithuania. I don't think they even try there. Because, for instance, these two countries were the first one to ban Kremlin-affiliated media. They recognized very, very early the function of this media in the disinformation apparatus of the Russians, but took time. In Germany, it took time, and to make things worse. In a case like RT, we had the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sigmar Gabriel, even giving interviews to RT, while the Balts were telling us, be careful, there's something going on, you should watch these people. So this is to give you the broader picture. The impact is, of course, seen during the elections. with the appearance of parties out of nowhere or existing parties whose programs get radicalized on new issues. And of course, in this context, the refugee crisis, obvious exploitation by the Russian hostile entities, which get monitored, of course, by our counterintelligence. So if you're interested in to get a picture for Germany, for instance, every year the counterintelligence or the Office for Domestic Intelligence, the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, publishes a report, and you can read what they have observed. And in the last years, it's been worse. It's been worse. The activities of the Russian services diversified, and they go of course, there is an entire cyber aspect to this, but they go from disruption to sabotage to subversion to wet jobs. Because meanwhile, the Russian services feel so at ease in Berlin that they walk directly downtown and liquidate people. So this is where Germany's situation is problematic, of course. I think people are doing their homework, but Germany is not the only case. We have Italy, as I said, we have France, we have, so they are, yes, there is an impact of this problematic situation on, or shall I say, a spillover effect of these type of operations.
Thank you. Yeah, and it definitely is not contained to Germany, because I don't think there's one country that hasn't seen these operations in Europe, these destabilizing operations. Thank you so much, Natia. Many, including yourself, have been sounding the alarm of the threat Russia poses to the Black Sea. And you also mentioned the naval base that Russia is solidifying in Abkhazia. Can you discuss both?
Yes, of course. Well, I do believe that Russia sees Black Sea as to be an integral part of its geopolitical goal, of its imperialist ambitions, and that's why we have been seeing for many years that Russia has been trying to increasingly militarize the Black Sea and project its power in the most aggressive way. And in that sense, of course, the absence and maybe lack of interest as well from the United States, from NATO, in terms of their power projection within the Black Sea has been giving Russia much leverage over the Black Sea region. And we know that the Black Sea is within the Black Sea, we have also NATO member countries that are also directly threatened by the ongoing militarization. But of course, the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Russia's war against Ukraine, has created a very unprecedented security situation in the Black Sea, and we see further efforts from Russia to obtain, to project its aggression, its aggressive malign activities within the Black Sea littoral states. And the latest demonstration of such projection of power has been the claims from the de facto leader of Abkhazia, Aslan Bzhania, who said that there has been an agreement that signed between Abkhazia and Russia, that there will be a permanent naval base in the Russian-occupied Abkhazia, which basically may, in a longer-term perspective, shift the battlefront to Georgia, because, as you know, Abkhazia is internationally recognized territory of Georgia, and upon which, unfortunately, Central Georgian government does not have control over. But at the same time, the fact that there could be a permanent naval base in the Russian-occupied Abkhazia creates an unprecedented set of risks to Georgia in terms of its national security. And I think what is very important here is that we have been seeing in the recent weeks, months, that Ukraine has been quite proactively challenging Russia in the Black Sea. And Russia was, according to some of the information that satellite imagery as well, we have seen that Russia was forced to withdraw some of its fleet from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, which has also been hit by Ukraine through sea drones and missile attacks, and that has demonstrated the vulnerability of Russian Navy within the Black Sea. But at the same time, I think it is not a coincidence that we hear that the de facto leader of Abkhazia claims that there will be this new naval base. In that sense, I think the full image is very important, because Russia might be looking to have some sort of temporary safe shelter, let's say, for its navy, given how proactively Ukraine has been attacking Russian warships. And in that sense, of course, this is not something new, actually, because there have been a lot of speculations about the expansion of this naval base in Abkhazia. And even after the 2008 war, Russian media has been very proactively pushing this narrative that there has been some agreement reached over this, but this has never been actually, this has only remained so far just a narrative that was promoted by the Russian media. But in real terms, if Russia really wants to expand its naval base in Abkhazia, it needs to carry out some of the very, it needs to put a lot of resources, because currently the port in Ochamchire in Abkhazia is not a deep sea port, and that's why Russia will need to invest loads of effort into expanding and building the naval base in Abkhazia. But at the same time, what this means for Georgia is quite important, because we have been actually hearing, especially in the recent months, one of the mainstream propaganda narratives, Russian propaganda narrative, that have been unfortunately echoed by some of the Georgian politicians as well, is that the main aim of the West is to somehow drag Georgia into the war and to open up a second front in Georgia in order to weaken Russia in a more efficient way. And this has been a major propaganda narrative that has been used in order to scare people, and in order to also cause skepticism towards Georgia's Western aspirations. And by scaring the population and stating that on the one hand, you have the real possibility that the West might drag Georgia into the war, and on the other hand, you have an option to be slightly more accommodating towards Russian interests and staying silent, let's say, not pro-Russian, but at the same time not make any provocative moves. And they have been selling this letter as the best option for Georgia's security. But what this decision in terms of building the naval base in Abkhazia means for Georgia is that this puts this propaganda narrative, the mainstream propaganda narrative, upside down. Because this clearly demonstrates that it is actually Russia that is trying to expand its front to Georgia. Because in case if this plan succeeds, then Abkhazia may become a legitimate target from the Ukrainian forces. So this means that ultimately Georgia will be dragged into the war, something that has been used as I mentioned as a Russian narrative to make sure that people are no longer that supportive towards Georgia being more proactively involved, proactively engaging with the Western partners. And I think what is necessary right now, of course, if Russia decides to do this, there's not much that Georgians can do to prevent this from happening, because we don't have effective control over Abkhazia and South Ossetia, so-called South Ossetia. But what is very much necessary right now is that Georgia needs to proactively engage with its partners. And this is a violation of international law. Of course, there are dozens of cases Russia violates international law every single day. But this is a very significant build-up, very significant development that will directly threaten not only Georgia, but also the Black Sea littoral states, because this is a one step ahead in terms of further militarizing the Black Sea and expanding the front over the Black Sea. And of course, in this case, there are also economic, strategic, and political threats for Georgia, because I'm sure that you might have heard that Georgia intends to build the Anaklia deep sea port. This project has been in the making for a while, and it is quite a controversial issue. I'm not going to go into the depths of the details. However, this plan to build the deep sea port has been cancelled in a couple of years ago, and now there is this ongoing conversation, and the government claims that they will still go ahead to build the port, which is of course in direct contradiction to the Russian interests, if of course they are serious, and there are of course concerns and questions whether they are really serious about building the Anaklia port. But in any case, if they're serious, even if they're serious about it, the build-up of the Russian naval base just a few kilometers away from the Anaklia port is a very serious threat, and no Western investor will be willing to invest in the Anaklia port if, of course, Russia goes ahead and builds the naval port, expands and builds the naval port in Abkhazia. So there are loads of dimensions there, apart from security, but I think main security threats there is that this demonstrates that there are further efforts to annex the occupied territories, and this also demonstrates that the fact that Russia is so invested in Ukraine, and the fact that their performance has been so poor thanks to the efforts and incredible bravery of Ukrainian people, does not really rule out the fact that Russia will retreat from its other fronts. And in this case, of course, Georgia, the security threats towards Georgia remain still present. And I would say that in many dimensions, these threats have been even more pressing in the recent past. So I'll stop here, and we'll be happy to answer any follow-up questions.
Thank you so much for that. Omar, you wrote a book, How ISIS Fights, and an article on how Putin's army fights like ISIS in Ukraine. Can you discuss how Russia's army uses the same tactics like terrorist organizations?
Sure, thank you so much for the question. By the way, on that note, tomorrow at the Diplomatic Academy, the Ukrainian version of that book with the chapter on how ISIS fights like, how Putin's army fights like ISIS in Ukraine it will be a book event at 12 at noon. So you're all invited, just a little announcement. But to answer the question, I'll go back to, what now, 10 years ago. So 2013, ISIS took Raqqa city in Syria for the first time. They took it again in 2014, but that was the first time. And 2015, I took a flight from my university is in Exeter City in the UK, so University of Exeter. So I took a flight and came to Kyiv in January 2015. And I had some field research for a project I was doing on basically how the weaker side fights, how the smaller side, the weaker side fights back, whether state or non-state. So there were 5 states and 5 non-state. ISIS was the most extreme in the non-state, in a sense that they had really no state sponsorship, no local support, fighting, no political strategy, fighting everybody from Al-Qaeda and the Taliban to the United States and its allies, and everyone in between. And no rugged geography even to fight, no jungles or mountains to fight in, and they still managed to take 120 cities, towns from the southern Philippines to the Western Africa. So that merited some explanation. So I was trying to do that, but also with other state forces. So I came and interviewed some folks from the Ukrainian armed forces and volunteer militias. And then they were describing what happened in Crimea. And I was like, wait, I saw this before. I saw that template before. And the template was basically, so how did they take Raqqa city from forces that outnumbered, outgunned them, and really hated them? So basically it was a series of infiltration operations of the ranks of the other non-state pro-revolution Syrian forces, a series of assassinations and kidnappings of civilian organizations, including priests and heads of basically civilian influencers of the public, and then followed by a series of bombings of the main forces that can face them, followed by a series of false front organizations putting we are a religious charity, but they're not really religious. They're an ideological front for a terrorist organization, So a series of false front organizations. And then after that, a series of information and psychological operations based on, so technically 2013, ISIS had no existence in Syria, like they did not want to show so much that they are existing. So they had their own Maskirovka operation. We're not there. But at the same time, they were saying, oh, we may be there, and ISI, our predecessor in Iraq, did all these beheadings, and so people got scared, So more or less psychological and information operations. And then after doing all this, they secured the neighborhoods that they controlled with force. And then the interviewees from the Ukrainian armed forces and the volunteer groups were basically describing the same thing that happened in Crimea: a series of infiltrations, a series of false front organizations, a series of kidnapping and assassinations to pressure the public. And then after that, after you make a full destabilization of the situation in a condition where the central government in Kyiv is dealing with a revolution and its aftermath, while doing all this, you secure it with, this is what ISIS lacked, conventional force. ISIS did not have the capability of an amphibious or an air assault, and did not have bases in Sevastopol to be able to blockade the Ukrainian bases, and the rest of the story. So it was an easier conventional operations. But add to that, so that operation was not always perfect, right? So because they tried the same thing in the Donbass, and it was a 50-50, it was, so Crimea was 100% was success. Tried the same thing in the Donbass, it was, 50-50, and people always forget that a lot of people from the Donetsk and Luhansk did not have the arms to fight and to resist, but after they got the arms and to fight and to resist, fought back. So most of the people I interviewed from Azov and other militias were from the Donbass. They were Russian speaking and they were from the Donbass. And I had this idea that they are probably from the West and Ukrainian speaking, which was not true. So the Russian propaganda was allegedly coming to liberate, were fighting very fiercely against them since 2014. So that's on a side note. And then 100% failure in Kharkiv. People also forget Kharkiv People Republic was declared on the 7th of April. 8th of April, it was toppled. It lasted 12 hours. Yeah, 12 hours. So, it's not always a success case. But then fast forward to 2022. Actually, before 2022, 2014, 2015, the usage of IEDs, also people tend, and my colleagues even tend to forget that, the IED usage by ISIS, they were the masters in IED warfare. They covered the retrogrades, their advances and retreats with IEDs. They plant them everywhere. They turned an urban war, an urban terrorism tactic, which is car bombs, into a very efficient conventional force tactic. It's like what we call the SVIBIDs, the suicide vehicle-borne IEDs, improvised explosive devices, were like land torpedoes, were like guided missiles. You know, they used them in a very effective way, and I'll explain more that later. But they turned these IEDs into a very effective. Who are doing this as well in the Donbass? The LNR and the DNR forces. 600 times in a period between 2014 to 2015, vehicle-borne IEDs, remote-controlled IEDs, and they were not the level of ISIS, because ISIS again were the masters of the game, but they were advancing it. But then they had also conventional capabilities that ISIS did not have. And then fast forward to 2022, and they live in Kyiv Oblast, so around us, over 18,000 improvised explosive devices, according to the Ukrainian government, to cover their retreats. But they leave them where? In children parks and in people's homes, in apartments. So no military value whatsoever, just damage, just cause damage. So yeah.
Like in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Who does that? Again, ISIS and perhaps the Taliban as well. So this is, and then the abuse of religion. So ISIS were the masters of getting religious texts out of context, mostly 7th century and 8th century texts and religious edicts, applying it to the 21st century with 21st century tools and propaganda. So videos and multimedias and social media and internet usage, okay, to recruit. Why they need, recruitment is their lifeline. You know, because the top brass is getting killed and the mid ranks are getting lost in battle, and if you can't recruit, you die. So they were able to mobilize. They were very successful in that. They were able to mobilize thousands. Okay, so now Russia has a similar crisis in terms of manpower. So you get the most senior religious figure in the Russian Orthodox Church, you know, blessing the Rosgvardia General Zolotov, the commander of the Rosgvardia, with a religious icon, and blessing his weapons to be able to mobilize, because the Rosgvardia are very important in terms of manpower mobilization. So you abuse the religion. You don't make religion a force for peace or a force for humanitarian action. You make religion a source of blessing weapons in a war of aggression against your neighbors. A very ISIS thing as well to do. Add to that the weaponization of, I'll stop here, the weaponization of sexual assaults. So weaponizing rape, basically, which was also a very, if you first declare in your official media that, Ukraine does not exist and there's nothing, it's called Ukraine, basically, to disseminate the identity, and then to try to get your soldiers to act in such a way, in hundreds of cases, then you are weaponizing rape. It's what ISIS did to the Yazidis in Iraq, and to try to basically destroy their identity in many ways. And so put this together, and this looks to me like a very ISIS way of warfare, but conducted by Mr. Putin forces here, whether the regular or the irregulars, whether the Russian army, because people just blame it on Wagner because they started the beheadings. Well, fair enough. They started beheadings in Syria, by the way, but for Syrian soldiers who are fighting with them, they wanted to defect, so they beheaded, and the most famous one was the soldier in Tadmur in Palmyra, where he tried to defect, and they cut his head and showed it on video. That was, I think, 2015. So yeah, they do the violations, but also the regulars do the same violations. So.
Thank you so much. And actually, to add to the Russian Orthodox Church, which frankly is cover for Russian intelligence operations, they were also one of the first to send out a mercenary group from St. Petersburg to come fight in Ukraine last year, which very interesting element to an Orthodox church. Sandra, can you tell us the current role of Russia in Afghanistan? Are they assisting the Taliban with, the executions and all the atrocities we have been seeing coming out of there?
Thank you. Yes. Well, actually, Russia is one of the two countries supporting directly the Taliban right now by inviting them to Moscow and giving them the platforms to talk to the people, to the international community, and to Russian people, and trying to legitimize the Taliban. At the same time, Russian government has established a close contact with some other non-state actors who are fighting against the Taliban. They are doing some target killings inside Afghanistan, kidnapping, rape, and bombing. But at the same time, I would like to share some of other examples, because I can see many similarities of the experiences of the Russian forces in different countries, including Afghanistan. What they did in Afghanistan, for example, during the Republic era, they were supporting candidates for parliament. And they had their own MPs inside Afghanistan parliament, trying to legitimize Russian interest in Afghanistan politics. They were recruiting young agents, young people, to be their agents. In this case, I can refer to the Russian Americans network that was arrested during the Obama administration. They recruited people from very young age, supported them through decades, and infiltrated them in the system, and getting information through them. They also, I can see another similarity. They took young children by thousands in Afghanistan to Moscow, train them, teach them, and send them back to Afghanistan. And they are still there. They established contacts with local media and using Afghan media, independent Afghan media, for their own agendas. As Professor Omar mentioned, they recruited mullahs, religious leaders, to publicize and to talk to the people, legitimizing the presence of Soviet troops in Afghanistan. And at the same time, during the communist regime in Afghanistan, and during the past 20 years of the US and NATO forces' presence in Afghanistan, they were paying for newspapers and sending the newspaper for free to different cities and distributing them among the people. So these are the examples of the Russian experience in Afghanistan, and I can see many similarities, not only in Afghanistan, but in other regions. So as mentioned, the Russian government is not acting responsibly as other governments. The other day, there was an incident in Canada. A Sikh leader was killed by an Indian agent. So there were some diplomatic rift between Canada and India. Somebody asked me why they are not blaming Pakistan or Russia or other states, but blaming India. I told them, there is a difference. India is a democracy. India is a responsible country and it's a responsible state. So they should be blamed because we are not expecting such an act from a democratic society or a democratic state. But it's I think, very, very normal to expect such an incident or such an act from countries like Russia or Pakistan or similar states. Thank you.
Thank you. And to quickly wrap up, I will start with Natalie. What has you up at night? What do you think that the West needs to hear?
You've got an hour?
No.
The West needs to understand that it is under constant threat, and the victim and the target of influence operations, and narratives prevailing currently about the Ukraine fatigue are artificially fabricated by these networks of influence. They want to impose the idea of Ukraine fatigue in target countries. They activate their vectors, conveying the message that we are stuck, we are funding a war for nothing, etc., etc. This is a large operation of demoralization of our Western target audience, and we need to do something about it. So please do me a favor, when you read something like that, background check, compare sources, go to Maria Adveva. She usually has the latest updates, and don't buy this Ukraine fatigue narrative.
Same. I don't know where to start, to be honest, but I think the most important thing that I have to say on this one is we have to thank Ukraine, because really it brought us together again. We were in a Brexit mood, in a NATO fleeing. I'm really sorry, of Afghanistan, in front of a wife-beating militia that prevents young girls from going to school, and we were sinking, and somehow Ukraine brought us together again, united us again, gave us a purpose again, and definitely inspired us on so many levels. So if I have to give any advice, stick with Ukraine and support Ukraine, and thank every Ukrainian you see on the street for bringing us back together again.
Well, for me, according to my experience from Afghanistan, I think issues such as Ukraine, Syria, and the continued intervention of Russia in democratic societies should not be based on elections. This should be an issue of long-term policies for the West. Otherwise, if they play with these issues only during the election and forget about it, things will not change. So we need to prepare a policy, a long-term policy, how to fight this behavior, because this is not new behavior. This is, as I told, this is coming from the Caesarean area of Russia. And it's gonna continue for I don't know, for long term. It's not only Putin. This is the kind of, historical thinking of the Russian oligarchs. So there should be a long-term policy for this to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Nadia? Oh.
I agree with everything that has been said, and I would add, I wouldn't be giving anything new, I guess, but I would stress on the fact that the West needs to support Ukraine as long as it takes. And by that, I mean, as long as Ukraine achieves full victory. There cannot be any partial victory. It's a nonsense itself. There cannot, and no power, no Western power can force Ukraine into making any concessions, because there cannot be any concessions, and this will be the defeat of the West if that happens. And I really hope that there will be no temptation within NATO allies, within the European allies, of starting this conversation that we hear. There are some attempts, unfortunately, already of trying to advocate this idea that there should be some decision made in terms of sitting down on a negotiation table. I think this should be a defeat of Russia on the battlefield, and I think the West needs to provide as much weapons, economic support to Ukraine as Ukraine needs it. And this is not something that the West is doing just for Ukraine. This is something that the West will be doing for its own security. And I would add one more thing. I think the West needs to really elaborate a Black Sea strategy. There has been a lot of conversations recently within the United States, in NATO as well, but we don't really see that there is any coherent strategy when it comes to the Black Sea security. And this is something that is a very pressing issue. So if I could give an advice, I would stress on these 2 points.
Thank you so much. This is why Ukraine must win, and as we have seen from this panel, that Russia's tentacles go far and wide around the globe for centuries. And I mean, anywhere from Georgia to Afghanistan to Syria, obviously Ukraine, Madagascar, I mean, you name it, Russia has, their fingerprints there in some kind of operations. And this concludes the panel. Thank you for joining us.